Tim M is from London, United Kingdom, and his home group is Brick Lane Big Book Study. The title of Tim's message is Keep It Simple, and he will be speaking for 45 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A. It is an honor and a privilege having you here with us today, Tim. Welcome.
My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. If I were to really keep it simple, I'd stop at about 5 minutes, but I've been given 45, so I shall use them. It's nice to see lots of faces. Um, I don't know. I know the intention is for me to be both encouraged and uplifted. My encouragement and uplift comes from the inside. I don't need any of that from the outside, but it's nice to see some faces to look at. And thank you to the meeting and thank you to the hosts and the organizers. An awful lot of work has gone into this. And that may well be a sacrifice. I'm not sacrificing anything by being, I'm very happy to give my time. Sacrifice implies I'm losing something, but I'm not losing anything by speaking at an AA meeting. It's conventional to have a home group in AA, and it's conventional to say what that home group is. Say my home group is Brick Lane Big Book Study, but I'm always very skeptical of being too attached to a home group and becoming factional about it. I think in big cities like London, it's less of a danger. In small places, it can cause real trouble, and so I'm just an AA member. There we go. A member of the world, like an Al-Anon, a member of the Worldwide Fellowship of the Al-Anon family groups. I'm a member of the Worldwide Fellowship of AA. It's as simple as that. I'm a common garden alcoholic, and um, some people like facts and figures. So I was born in 1971. Got sober in 1993. Those are the two facts and figures. Very glad still to be sober. It amazes me. Um, my alcoholism is very simple. I like to describe it in a way that anyone who is an alcoholic will chime with. I think in 12 step calls, sometimes I'll get them to tell their story and um, find anecdotes of my own to try to connect very specifically with that person. But in a meeting, one can't do that. I don't know your stories. It's the things in common which really matter, not the elaborate descriptions of what my drinking felt like with poetic with poetry and with wit. We're not interested in that. We're interested, I think, in the anatomy of alcoholism, what it really consists of. Uh, as far as I'm concerned, alcoholism is, as I said, very simple. Top of page 44 of the big book for the page number lovers amongst you. That's where the summary of step one is. Um, uh, when I drink vast quantities. Um, I don't know if I could control it. I never really tried. What is true is what an observer would see, which is when I drink vast quantities. And anyone who drinks vast quantities is A, going to get into trouble, and B, going to mess up the rest of their life eventually. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. In my case, quickly. Um, the, the book talks about this wretched thing called the physical craving. And I want to talk very specifically about these mystifying technical terms in the big book because they get bandied around and they're often very ill defined. My friend James explains the physical craving very, very well. He says when he goes to the cinema, he looks forward to it all day because he's going to buy a box of Maltesers. Now, if you're not British, you might not know what Maltesers are. They're a little spherical chocolate, whether I think a honeycomb scent or something like that. And he looks forward to buying his box of Maltesers. He looks forward to it all day. And he gets into the cinema with his box of Maltesers and the box of Maltesers is finished by the time he but by the time the trailers are over, but by the time the film has started, The Maltesers were long gone, and all day he's craving these Maltesers, looking forward to them. Now, that's craving in the ordinary English language of today. But what they're describing in the big book is something entirely different, and it's this. I cannot be thinking about alcohol for days or weeks, and the thought will very casually cross my mind. I could have a drink. I've left meetings and thought, oh, I could have a drink. I'm not craving that thought. It's just a casual thought. And then I have a drink, and then the craving kicks in. James says about the Maltesers, once he's had his box of Maltesers, he doesn't leave the cinema to get some more Maltesers and then come back. He's done. He's had his Maltesers, he's finished, he's getting on with the film. If Maltesers were alcohol, I would get in there with my bottle and think, I've had some alcohol. I'm not interested in the film anymore. I want more alcohol. That's the physical craving. It's the desire for alcohol, which is triggered by having alcohol. And I remember times that I would go home with a small to medium bottle of something sedate on a Saturday evening to watch something very particular on the television. Of course, if any of you remember the late 80s, if it was on the television and you missed it, you'd missed it. You weren't going to have another chance if you didn't have a video recorder, which I didn't. I remember one evening, I won't say what it was, but there was something I very much wanted to watch, a particular play. And I got my bottle and I got home and I started to drink. And about 15 minutes in, I was enjoying the play, but I was enjoying the alcohol more. And I had this very curious feeling as I then headed out to the pub of sadness that I was having to obey the orders of the alcohol within me to carry on drinking and to go for it. Wasn't enough often to just drink at home. I needed to go for it out there, find something. I didn't know what. And it was with sadness, as I say, that I left this thing that I really wanted to do at home. So the physical craving is something which is triggered by having the first drink. In the language generally, if you have a craving for something and you have the thing, you've now satisfied the craving is gone. The physical craving I have with alcohol, if I have alcohol, it doesn't satisfy the craving. It first of all triggers it and then it amplifies the craving. It gets worse and worse and worse the more I drink. Now that's not the only problem, and it's not the real problem. The real problem is the fact that even though I recognize very early in my drinking that the way I drank made ordinary, functional, satisfying everyday life quite impossible. I didn't resolve to stop drinking. It was with sadness again that I recognized, well, I shall just have to kiss goodbye to various, I had various pursuits which I was interested in, but those pursuits required physical and mental and emotional balance. And I couldn't do those things with a hangover, which I had every day. I couldn't do those, certainly couldn't do those things drunk. It was with sadness that I regretfully conceded to myself, I'm going to have to carry on drinking, so I shall just have to kiss goodbye to those things. Oh well, at least I have alcohol. And I remember a time in the middle period of my drink. It makes it sound very grand, doesn't it? Like one of those sort of famous painters who has an early period and a blue period and a middle period and a rather alarming late period. Anyway, my middle period drinking consisted in me losing any shred of normality, but thinking, well, at least I can buy a bottle of wine and sit on the pavement and drink it pavement being the sidewalk if you're American, not the middle of the carriageway, although I did that as well. But I thought all I need is a bottle and I'm fine. The real problem with my alcoholism is being trapped inside a life of drinking, which seems normal and seems the only possible avenue. I didn't seriously try to stop drinking throughout most of my drink. There were a couple of times circumstances forced me to stop, and I stayed stopped for a while just to see what it was like, hoping that if I had a long break from it, my drinking might calm itself down. But I don't think I ever really thought, well, that's it for good now. I was just taking a holiday from it. Apart from those rare occasions, the thought of sobriety, well, first of all, it was impossible. I couldn't conceive of it. And secondly, it wasn't appetizing. If being sober appealed to me, I wouldn't have drunk in the first place. And nod slowly if that makes sense to you. The reason I drank was because I wasn't interested in the world. That was why, being shuffled into an entirely different mode of existence, which is what alcohol did for me, was so appealing, is because life was so appalling as I saw it, and certainly as I was living it. So to sum up very simply what step one is left to my own devices, I am condemned to carry on drinking by a mind that tells me that it's a good idea, and I'm condemned by a physical constitution to continue. The reason why I think it says a physical craving is because it is a phenomenon which is activated by doing a physical thing, which is having the first drink, from which we conclude this is not the result of a mental process coinciding with the first drink. It's caused by the first drink. And that's very clear. If you've ever had a period of sobriety where you haven't thought about alcohol, then you have a drink and then you are preoccupied with it until you can have another one. You'll get a sense that it was the physical thing of having the drink which caused the change internally. If you find yourself sober today, as I hope everyone here is, and if not, I'm sure you're very welcome, and I hope sobriety strikes you. I can't get anyone sober. A friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, says we don't know of any program that can get people sober. Once you're sober, once something strikes you sober, we have a program which can keep you that way. I think one of the greatest disservices we do in AA is to say, using language loosely, that we get people sober. We do not. We do not detox people. We don't induce sobriety. We seem to have little effect on those who are drinking and chance through the doors. Certainly my attempts to induce sobriety or to bring about willingness in someone who is drunk or high or whacked out on something they've doctor shopped for. It's a waste of time. Lots of very august people tried to help me before I got to AA. And if the long faces of people that I was genuinely fond of, if that wasn't sufficient to stop me from drinking, then your learned arguments are certainly not going to help. It was by providence only that I discovered myself sober in AA, and that I would discover myself able to come back to AA after having had one of my little drinks, because I was in AA for 6 months, drinking periodically before I had my last drink in the July of 1993. providence only, which means that if I were to drink again, I can't guarantee that providence would strike again like lightning and allow me to come back. Because the drunk me does not want to be sober. That's the problem. So if I flick the switch, if I cross over to the other side of the looking glass, the person on the other side of the looking glass is having a good old laugh at us with what we're doing here. A friend of mine drank at 10 years and said that his first thought was, why have I been depriving myself of this all these years? And he'd had a good 10 years. The 10 years were good. Last couple of years were ropey, but the first 10 years were good. Alcohol changes my mind, so I must never have another drink. Anyone else in the room who is sober 20, 30 years, I think it's true also, even if you're 5 years. If you think back to your home group when you were new and you ask yourself, where are they now? Some died sober, some are still sober, some are drunk, some are in and out, some are dead, most are missing. When one encounters people who were missing, so one doesn't know what happened to them. In my experience, some of them they pop up, they crop up in AA somewhere, or comes across them that way. But most of the ones that I've known who disappeared out of home groups and I encounter them, as we say, in the community, are not looking so good anymore, poor old things. It's very nice in a group to be surrounded by all the jollity and the loveliness and the laughter. But there's a cold, hard, steely truth, which is that not everyone is going to make it by a very long chalk. But who makes it is decided by the individual themselves. It's not a cosmic lottery. I was told confidently in my first year, if you do certain things, you need never drink again. And I did those things and I've done those things. And since I've been doing those things, I haven't drunk. I have they say, I think that if I dare say something about the Jesuits, I think the Jesuits say if you can get in there with 7 or 8 year old with inculcating doctrine, then with a bit of luck, you'll have them for life. And it's a little bit like that with AA. It got me very young. It got me when I was 21. And I knew nothing when I got here. I was incapable. And people in AA taught me basically everything I know. And so I have a huge reverence, not for any individuals in AA, but love for them, which is different, but reverence for the institution and for the principles and for the program. And I won't hear anything said against it. If you want to say something against it, go and tell someone else. Not interested. I've tried to reform AA. I've tried to snazz it up, jazz it up. I've started a lot of meetings. Lots of those are still going, which is nice. I've tried to do new things. There's thinking if only we can package it right, we'll get through to people. There's a scene in Downton Abbey where one of the characters says to another character, you see room for improvement anywhere. I've never seen such reforming zeal. And the other character says, I'll take that as a compliment. And the first character says, I must have said it wrong. The worst harm I've done in AA is by trying to reform it. And there's a C.S. Lewis line, experience beats in vain on a congenital progressive. And I was congenitally designed, I think, to try to change things, to try to alter things, to try to bend them to how I want them to be. And in AA, I've stopped doing that. I like a simple, bog standard meeting where anyone can come and anyone does come with a simple format. Read a couple of things, share, boom, done. I've stopped having bright ideas for improving the meeting or the layout or the this or the that. And I think everyone is relieved. A friend of mine in another country, they were lots of bright young things, which is very good. But the culture in that group was for everyone to have lots of bright ideas the whole time and bring those bright ideas to the meeting. And they ended up having once a month group conscience meetings, which lasted 3 to 4 hours as they were discussing endless new ideas for improving the meeting. And my experience of bringing ideas to a meeting, almost every idea I've had to improve the meeting has come because I've got a grievance against someone or something. And if only I learn a little bit more patience and tolerance, there won't be any need for my little proposal. There are a few things which are necessary. Timers are helpful, in my experience. But to just leave AA was here first. It does not need me. The groups I go to, most of them were there. They need God and any alcoholics who want to get well. I'm not the center of anything. I'm just, what's the phrase? Another bozo on the bus. I haven't heard that for a while, but I think it's a very helpful one. And doesn't need to be, I mean, groups do have names. My home group has a name, but I wish it didn't. I wish it was just I used to live in St. Petersburg, Russia, don't ask. And the schools there at the time, I think it may have changed, were numbered. So if you went to a high school, a secondary school in St. Petersburg, you go to secondary school number 42 or secondary school number 94. Everything was numbered, same in Moscow. And I wish AA meetings were like that. So we didn't have any branding, no names, no little subfaction, just AA. I'm very fond of the big book. It got them sober, so it can get me sober. As I don't think that the people try and change the big book sometimes, and if I were writing it today, I'd probably write it differently. Lots of things. It was a different age, I get that. But one of the things I've loved about AA, I was very disruptive in my early meetings. And I create scenes, cause ructions, scrape my chair around the floor just to get a reaction out of people, go and get cups of tea and biscuits and go for cigarettes and huff and puff and sigh and fold my arms and unfold my arms and try to get people's attention and come in late and tiptoe theatrically across the room, waving to selected recipients of my greeting as I went. If something wasn't about me, I wasn't interested. So I made the whole meeting about me. And I was dealt with by group consciences. They put a stop. People put a stop to that. What I was told to do was just be quiet and take my turn. I could have a turn like everyone else, but to take my turn. And I would tell people all the rubbish that people were saying and complaining, and they said, you'll have to learn to tolerate them as they've had to learn to tolerate you. And that was a nasty little lesson. When I'm reading the big book, I get to practice the same thing. If there's a passage I don't like, I've learned to tolerate it rather than saying we need to change it so it matches what I would like. I think it's the most wonderful thing to be able to read something written in a different culture, in a different country, at a different time, and not judge it through my own lens, but to see it through the eyes of the people it was written by and through the eyes of the people it was written for, and to see what they say, look for the similarities, not the differences. And in my first 15 years of AA, it was as though AA was an elevator, a lift, where I wanted to get to the roof terrace at the top of the 12 stories. And there were 12 buttons on the side of the lift, but I didn't trust that all you had to do was press them in order and you would get to the top. I spent the whole time feeling round the blank sheet metal walls of the lift, looking for the secret buttons, or getting out on particular floors and running around and looking for other things, looking for other, what does it say in the big book? You see, they were there first. Practitioners of various sorts. I found practitioners of various sorts very good at what they do, but they didn't solve the problem that I had, which was alcoholism. I came to AA on the surface with an awful lot of different problems. But it turns out the only problem I had was alcoholism. Embarrassing, really, to just be an alcoholic. When I sorted that out, everything else was sorted out. And I'll tell you what I mean by sorting out the alcoholism. I believe what it says on page 44 of the big book, that alcoholism is a twofold condition. If A, when you drink too much, if when you drink way too much, and if when you stop you can't stay stopped, probably alcoholic. Those are the two things. And the 12 and 12, it talks about a double-edged sword of the mental obsession and the physical craving. I won't rehearse exactly what it says there, but two problems. To solve the physical craving, I need to stay sober. And so to stay sober is the only problem. And the great thing is, I don't need to sort out my life to stay sober. I don't need to sort out my twisted psychology to stay sober. I don't need to do anything but trust God. And what God will then say is, I've got some work for you to do, Sonny Jim. You need to do a moral inventory. And I said, no, not a moral inventory. I need a psychological inventory because I'm complicated. So it's not morality, it's psychology. See what I mean? Right, straight out of the trap, I was trying to change things. God will say you need a moral inventory, confession, you need to forgive people by withdrawing the judgment. Page 67, top of that, those prayers effectively withdraw the judgment to say they are down here on the ground with me, full of problems. So I'm to love them because they're full of problems too. You're going to confess some stuff. You're going to make some amends. You're going to try and help other alcoholics. Do that. And what I discovered when I did that for long enough, the psychology sorted itself out. It took a while, I have to say. It wasn't overnight, but the psychology sorted itself out. The spiritual malady needed to be solved first. And this is the thing. The spiritual malady is not part of alcoholism. It's described in lots of places in the big book, but when it describes it as how regular folks are, and alcoholics are like that too, because we're people. So on pages 60 to 62, it talks about someone who is full of self-will that tries to redesign the world to their own liking, the same way that I try to redesign AA and redesign the program and redesign my home group and redesign the people around me to my own liking. And the examples it gives, you'd think it would just say alcoholics, but it doesn't. It says the outlaw safecracker, the retired businessman lolling in the Florida sunshine. Right at the end of the list is the alcoholic. The bedevilments on page 52, that couldn't make a living, prey to misery and depression and fear, full of fear, trouble with personal relationships. It doesn't say it's alcoholic problems. It says these human problems. Humans had them first. And then these wicked people that do these terrible things we have to write about in step 4 before we discover we have to forgive them. Says the world and its people were often quite wrong, and those people like us were sick too. So the spiritual malady is, in a sense, the human condition. It gets called different things in different domains, which I won't rehearse here. But I think it's a well documented. We're not the first people to set ourselves up in opposition to God, trying to make a name for ourselves on a planet where when you die, you're forgotten. I mean, the insanity of that. We're not the first people to come up with that plan for living. I know, grab as much as I can. There's a show in England. I'm sure the Americans had it first. It's so bad, the Americans must have invented it first, and we borrowed it, called Supermarket Sweep, where there's some sort of, no offense, but you know what I'm talking about. We gave you Masterpiece Theatre, and you gave us Supermarket Sweep. Anyway, Supermarket Sweep, there are lots of questions and things people need to do, but the prize at the end is you take your supermarket trolley and you push it around the supermarket, you throw all the things in the supermarket trolley, then you get to take them home. Now, the material world, how I tried to live in the material world was like that. I need to get sex and money and power and prestige and fun and love and adulation and respect and validation and money and sex and money and things and holidays and friends and mortgages and a pension and nice hats and a house and then bigger house and then things to put in the house and then people to pay to mend the things in the house which have now broken. Just this endless thing, pouring everything into the shopping trolley, not realizing that when the supermarket sweep is over, unlike in the show Supermarket Sweep, I take none of it with me. And I wasn't enjoying any of it as it was coming past because I was so obsessed with getting the next thing. Completely insane. That's the spiritual malady. And I don't know if you've read any newspapers, but people are like that. The people they write about in the newspapers are like that too. It's not just, it doesn't say all of these people are members of AA or alcoholics, regular folks. Now, I seem therefore to have two problems going on. Problem number 1, alcoholism. Problem number 2, being a person. My solution to problem number 1 is to be in the hands of God. And I'll tell you why. If it isn't self-evident, why? Because it wasn't self-evident to me for a very long time why I needed a relationship with God in order to stay sober. And it's this. What it talks about in step 1 is insanity. Now, if I'm insane, that means that a thought that I have, which is untrue, unreal, invalid, will not appear to me to be untrue, invalid, insane. It will appear to me like all of the other thoughts. So, it's interesting in the big book. It demonstrates this very clearly. In Jim's narrative on pages 35, 36. So Jim, AA member, has a slip. Jim, what happened? And he tells us. And then they wrote it down. And then Fred, AA member, has a slip. Oh no, Fred, what happened? He tells us, we write it down. 2 stories, Fred, page 39. And in each of those, you look at their description of what was going through their mind. And it's one thought, another thought, another thought. And they're just little thoughts. They're having a thought. I'll have a sandwich. I'll get in the car. I'll go and find a client. I'll put whiskey in the milk. I'll be all right. The thought does not have a little bell on it saying, hey, I'm an insane thought. Do something about me. Call your sponsor because you've had an insane thought. No, it's just a thought like any other. All day, my little mind is going, little thoughts all day long. none of the insane thoughts tell me that they're insane. That's why they're insane. The whole point of insanity is the person who is insane will not realize that the insane thought is insane, which is why it's useless to tell an alcoholic, when you have an insane thought, do a sane thing. First of all, they won't know they've had an insane thought. Secondly, insane thoughts, in my case, with alcoholism, have a habit of yanking the steering wheel and taking over. So even if you want to oppose the insane thought, you can't, or at least I can't. So what this means is I am an absolute liability. I should not be trusted with my life. I should not be given the keys to the bus. Because if I am, I'll kill myself by accident. Which then elicits the question, well, how do you get through the day then? You need something to live by. I needed something to live by other than, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? Which was how I lived before. I know, I'll ask me what to do. That's what got me needing to come to AA in the first place, was asking myself what to do and then doing it. So what AA has taught me is to trust the AA program, the 12 steps, to trust, to live by the principles within those, to trust the people, that famous AA saying, we're not all mad on the same day. We're also, even if we are mad on the same day, we're mad about our own stuff, not other people's. So you look at someone else's rubbish and you can see a perfect, simple path through it. Your own stuff, forget it. That's why I think we need each other. We talk each other through these situations. And then the higher power. And with those four things of the program, the principles, the people, and the prayer, the talking to God, the fifth thing, which is the power to stay sober, is somehow unlocked. The insane thoughts come very rarely, but even when they do come, because my habit, my commitment is to stay sober come what may, to do the actions of the program come what may, to stay sober, to get to bed tonight without a drink, regardless of what I think or feel. Because I gave up myself, even though I was mad in my first year and really unhappy most of the time. Less unhappy than in my drinking, but really unhappy, like in an absolute objective sense, really unhappy. And I had wacky days. I didn't drink, not because I was well, but because I was surrendered to that system of living, because I trusted in that and I'd ceased to trust in myself. There's no point in trying to trust the program until I'd stopped trusting in myself. I acquired a horror of what would happen to me and my life if it were left in my hands. And so I had to turn my will and life over to God, step 4 through 9, to clear out the past, to get me to recoil with full horror at the way I'd been living in order to get my sticky mitts off my life. And then to live a very simple program in 10, 11, and 12, which I will come to. Now, the result of doing that as a completely unintended byproduct, I had to put my life, my entire life, every moment of every day in the hands of God, simply to stay sober. Forget anything else, simply to stay sober. I needed to be nailed down with frankly, a very, very rigid program. There was always something to do, even running between things. I would have my little tape player with AA tapes, my AA literature. I filled every spare moment with AA things because I was told to, and I did it, and it worked. Very good. I needed to do that merely to stay sober. But as the unintended side effect, literally everything else was sorted out. Oh, amazing. Like, who knew that would happen? But it happened slowly, and it didn't happen on my time. And it happened when I wasn't trying. I've had really very tricky psychological problems and what is referred to as mental illness. in my life. And these things were the clamorous voices, completely implacable, refractory and resistant to any attempt by outside forces, human forces, to solve, completely refractory and resistant to my own attempts to sort these things out. And over the years, by doing 10, 11, and 12, having completed step 9, very important, it's like opening a safe. You've one of those combination safes where you have to dial the dial to lots of different numbers, left and right to this number and that number, and then eventually the safe opens. My step 9 was like that. I had to make every single amend, and then the safe opened, and I was released from my cell. By working 10, 11, and 12, I've woken up gradually and realized that things that used to bother me, things that used to eat my lunch, don't eat my lunch anymore. And I didn't do anything directly except regular moral inventory. I do a quarterly 360-degree review of my life, a miniature, steps 1 through 9, once a quarter. Because I like the effect it produces, and I see what happens to people that don't. There we go. So I do that once a quarter, and doing that, I don't need to work. I haven't worked on a problem for years. I simply follow that basic format, and the problems work themselves out, not on my schedule. The daily program is very simple, and this is what is at the core of it. I get up, I wake up, and before I wake up, I'm praying. If I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm praying. The way that's become automatic is by doing it so often it becomes automatic. Running memorized prayers through one's head immediately before one goes to sleep will very often ensure that those prayers occur to one if one wakes up in the middle of the night panicky or strange, which is something that will happen to me. And if you do it enough, I'm not frightened of, when you're ill with a high temperature and you're all of the, the emotions, the negative, the darkness, the negative emotions. I'm not frightened of those states anymore because my mind just prays. My physical brain has been trained over many years to just pray the whole time when it is idle. If it's idle, it's praying. If I'm not giving it something to do, it's praying. Why? Because I trained it to do that. My brain is not intelligent or stupid. It just does what it's trained to do. It does whatever I practice becomes the way it operates. That's how my brain has been rewired, by retraining it. The physical brain has less intelligence than a poodle, but it can be trained, just neurons. And it's mind which trains the brain, not the other way around. A mind is in the hands of God, which is why this works. I get up, wake up, I'm praying before I wake up. First thing, headphones on, I'm listening to something spiritual. I don't start dialoguing about my day straight away because I'm not in a fit state. It takes me a while before I'm in a fit state. And the first couple of hours are spiritual stuff, maybe some correspondence with AA members who are sponsees or whatever. I go to a meeting, spiritual readings, sometimes writing. And then a couple of hours into the day, I think, now I'll look at the things to do today. The meditation in step 11, this is a horrible shock to those of you who've gone on very expensive courses in Thailand on how to meditate. The step 11 in the big book is ask God what to do today, write it down, and then do it. There we go. Concentrated thought. What does God want me to do today? And then all I have to do is do it in the order that, if I don't know what order, I ask God, and I don't second guess it. I just get on with it. And I've got to look after myself. I have lots of obligations. If you ask God for obligations, you'll get them. And they're split between monetary work is not important to me. It's necessary. I have a livelihood, but the work in AA, the work in other areas is important. The people are more important than the money and the career and all of that. Very modern notion of career is very modern. Not all the data are in yet. Don't trust it. Simple life. Get up, ask God what to do, look after myself, fulfill my obligations, and appreciate things. Be amazed at being alive. Be amazed at what is available to someone who is alive and sober, and thank God constantly and talk to God constantly. There is no problem that AA and its very simple original program has not solved in my life, and that's 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you, Tim. My name is Kieran. I am an alcoholic. I will be your moderator for today. As Donna said, this is a Q&A. So if you do have a share, a couple members of the service team will be staying after the meeting for that. The timer has been set to 60 seconds, and please come in and ask your question for Tim. Rachel, I'm going to bring you in.
Thank you very much, Kira, and thank you everyone for making this meeting. It's the first time I've attended. I've been waiting to see your face, Tim, for 3 years. I love that if your brain is idle, you are praying or speaking to God. If I'd have heard that when I first came in, I would have been in absolute awe and disbelief. But I'm on my way to that with you now. And I just wanted to ask how quickly, how slowly did that happen for you? How did you go from having no relationship to God to constantly being in dialogue?
That's a good question. So yeah, the first 15 years of my recovery, as far as God was concerned, was frankly a bit of a catastrophe. I did pray, but my connection to God was through all sorts of indirect means. Bill C, I think, puts it very well. He says, sometimes things get so bad, you are reduced to prayer. It's the last thing that one tries. Utter desperation. One of people choose different routes, and that's up to them. I think, again, there are lots of new words these days which one has to write down to learn how to pronounce. And neurodivergent is one of them, and I was one of those. And I've made the choice in my life since my early sobriety to face life really cold turkey. There's no chemical barrier between me and the consequences of how my brain operates, and that's been very rough at times. But I'm grateful for that. I mean, I survived it. Not everyone would have, maybe. So it's not a judgment. What other people do, entirely their business. I'm just this is my experience, my choice. It was only by very, very extreme suffering at the hands of my own brain that I put real effort into forming a relationship with a higher power. And I tell you, that doesn't stop. There are layers upon layers of that. People talk about the layers of the onion of self, and I think that's a dead end. There are no layers of self. There is just self. There's one thing, which is self, and either I'm in it or I'm not. One writer said, if you keep peeling the layers of the onion, you'll end up with nothing, because there's nothing at the center of the onion. There's really, each layer is the same as the one above. But with God, there are layers. You see, God is much more interesting than self. And this is what I've discovered. This is why my energy with my program, the program, today goes into the relationship with God, not into, I remember hearing someone saying many years ago, the recovery is an endless journey of the discovery of self. Thank God it isn't. It's a journey of the abandonment of self and the perpetual perpetual obligation to have to get rid of it because it creeps in through the cat flap again, and you have to pick it up and kick it out again. It's not greater depth, it's repetition. Every day you have to take the trash out. But it's the relationship with God. And I'll share one thing. I've had a doozy over 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to go into the details, but I don't want to make a production number of myself, but there have been some events, shall we say. And one of those events left me in a condition. I'm a big reader. One of those events left me in a condition where I was unable to read. Everything I read disgusted me, either for its triviality or for its something. And I discovered a particular, well, I'll say it is C.S. Lewis. Now, I'd always liked C.S. Lewis. I'd read most of C.S. Lewis, at least all the fiction, and some of the theological stuff, but I hadn't read all the literature stuff, and I hadn't read most of the theology stuff, most of the essays and letters. But I discovered I could read C.S. Lewis. And because it was the only thing I could read, and I needed to do something with my mind, if I don't give my mind something to do, it eats itself alive. There's an image in certain movements of a snake with a tail eating itself, and that's what I become. And I read everything that's pretty much that C.S. Lewis wrote, and a lot of it I read it twice. And a lot of it is about God. And I came out at the end of that with lots of theological problems about God, completely gone. The thing about the spiritual path, I've gone in all sorts of different directions, and I think it doesn't matter what the direction is, as long as it's sincere, and as long as the aim is to be rid of self and to be connected to the world and to God and to reality. If that is the purpose, I think one is led. I've been led, and the path can't be copied. My path is going to be different to anyone else's. But if you ask God, I think God seems very generous in terms of giving people ways forward, and it's constantly changing. In Star Trek, Next Generation, there is an enemy called the Borg, and if you try to use your phasers on them, the Borg adapt. They sort of communicate with each other through, I don't know, subspace frequencies or something. So you try and use the phaser twice, and they've adapted, and it doesn't work. So you need to set the phasers to be constantly resetting themselves on new frequencies to get the better of the adaptation of the Borg. And the ego is like the Borg. The ego will go to every single AA meeting you go to. If you do a Course in Miracles, it will do a Course in Miracles right alongside you, underlining important passages and writing yes, very true in the margin. It will have all of the ammunition you have. I've needed to keep my spiritual life alive by constantly it's two things. It's sticking with the basics, but constantly reading, listening, investigating with an open mind. And it's those with AA, it's 98% the same thing over and over and over, with little new things come in. But with the spiritual life, it needs to be growing the whole time. But I keep the basics in place as well. With spiritual paths, I think one does have to be careful. Bob D, I think, says this best of anyone. He says, those spiritual things one does those in addition to, not instead of. And sometimes I go down rabbit holes with spiritual stuff where I get all confused and the world goes dark and I don't know what's up and what's down. And so I go back to pages 84 to 88 of the Big Book, in particular the morning. On awakening, we ask God to direct my thinking. So I say, God, please direct my thinking. I just literally do what it's literally asking me to do and content myself with that for a few weeks until sanity is restored, and then I set out again. So hopefully that answers the question somewhat.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that amazing answer. I was just soaking it in. And thank you, Rachel, for that question. Tim, we do have 3 hands raised, and Jagjit will be our last speaker or our last question. Is that all right? Perfect. Tracy, would you like to come in with your question?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I've never shared back on this meeting. I've been on quite a few times and things, but I've never not shared back, asked questions and things. Yeah, Tim absolutely blew me away. Wow. Wonderful, wonderful. What I really kind of wanted to ask you, if it's okay, please, was if you at all had any sort of perhaps sort of tips for step 10, because I've kind of relapsed quite a bit in the past and things, and I've been working with my sponsor, and I think it's because I wasn't grasping sort of step 10 and things, if that makes sense. But if you could answer that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Very good question. Okay, so if I want to know what a step is, I ignore almost everything I hear in meetings, and I ignore the 12 and 12. Where the 12 and 12 is a very different beast than the big book. Things which are in one step in one book are in another step in the other. The questions in step 4 are different. I love the 12 and 12. It's got some interesting material, but it's not my instruction book. I know people that used it as their instruction book with amazing recoveries, and they hated the big book. Fine, that worked for them. I happen to be using the big book. So if I want to know what a step is, I go to the pages of the big book which say, this is step 10, this is step 11. And in step 10, I think what it says on page 59, when it just lists the 200 words of the steps, which are on the sort of wall shades or scrolls, as they're sometimes called, those are just little ways to help us remember what roughly the step is, but they're not the substitute for what's actually written in the book. So if one wants to practice step 10 in the book, it's not a nightly review. That's in step 11 in the book. It's not, there's no pen and paper. Thank God. Oh, I hate writing inventory. I really hate, and luckily it only asks me to do it in step 4. So I only do it in step 4. Step 10. The step 10 in the big book has got, it's basically 1.5 pages. Some of it is commentary. Some of the things are statements which can be turned into instructions. So it talks about neutrality. It talks about love. It talks about all sorts of things which you can turn into, well, principles to live by. But then it gives very specific instructions. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. Now, you got to trust the book. You got to trust them. They knew what they were talking about. Yes, they were 4 years sober, but it's 4 years on the back of thousands of years of religious and spiritual experience, channeled through the experience of those 4 year sober people into the book. They didn't make anything up. They channeled it from elsewhere. So yes, they were 4 years sober, but they're on the back of something far greater. You've got to trust it, which means trusting it's sufficient. So as I'm going through the day, I trust it is literally sufficient to look for only 4 things: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. There is no internal disturbance or bad behavior which does not fall into one of those. And when we spot them, we ask God at once to remove them, get back on track, get back in the saddle. If you need to talk to someone, but to refocus on what it says on page 85. Every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. So the way my problems get solved is not by solving my problems. It's by leaping back away from them and getting into the usefulness of the moment at hand. With there is a nightly review. I deem my day to end around tea time, and so That's when I'm walking back from work. That's when I do a little review. What went well, what went badly? Is there a problem? I literally just asked myself those questions from the top of page 86. And what I'm after is the corrective measures. What does God want me? Is there any mess that needs clearing up? And what do I need to do tomorrow? I don't need to solve my life. I just need to get tomorrow a little bit better than today. So as I said, I just do exactly what it says in the book, and it works. As Paul Martin says, who died with over 60 years of sobriety, it works for me. That's the only authority this has.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that answer. And Tracy, thank you for your question. Catherine, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. I made lots of notes. Once we know about 12 steps and that there is a solution, can we choose recovery? Is it possible to choose to surrender by admitting that we are defeated and by wanting what others have, i.e. recovery, and willing to go to any lengths? Can we then, can we have recovery? Or is it that providence that you were talking about?
Are you talking about outside? Do you mean inside? Surrendering once you're inside? Yeah, I'll take that to be the case. So once you're inside
Sorry,
AA,
I was trying to unmute there. Yes, so before we come into program, we don't really know what the problem is, but then we do come to program and we hear all about, the physical allergy, the mental obsession, and we hear that there is a solution. And I've heard different people say that, we can reach a rock bottom by admitting we are defeated. Why? Because we have a physical allergy and a mental obsession and those mental blank spots, and that we need a higher power, and we can choose that higher power. Can we do that, or do we have to be struck by that providence where, it just happens? If that makes sense.
in a sense, it doesn't make sense because it doesn't reflect my experience. My experience was very simple, and it's reflected in page 58 of the big book. It talks about the people that can't get it are the ones that can't be honest, which implies that the ones who are honest will get it. And it was as simple as this. I can't stop drinking. These people have stopped drinking. They know how, or rather, they know how to stay stopped. I want to stay stopped. So I'm going to do what they did. That's all. It's simply the honesty of recognizing I have a problem I can't solve. There are people who have solved the problem and they know exactly what to do. And all I have to do is shut up and do as I'm told. So I get away from abstract concepts of surrender and just keep it very close to what it says on page 58. And I think we've got time for one more.
We do. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Catherine, for that question. I absolutely, I was with you. So, Jagjeet, would you like to come in?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tim, for that. It was entertaining look on AA, and it was really narrated perfectly. Honestly, I so enjoyed it. I'm going to watch that again and again. Honestly, I've picked up so many tips off that. I'm having trouble. I'm still early days in. I'm 13 days today, Tim, brother. I'm having trouble like concentrating on like meditating. I can't clear my mind enough to meditate in the mornings. Have you got any tips on that, Tim, please?
I wouldn't bother if I were you. What I said about meditation, you see, the trouble is, the problem we've got in AA is because we read the word meditation in step 11 and we paste on top of it all of the associations in contemporary, in our case, Britain. If you went to 100 people in the street and said, well, what is meditation? You got them to draw what meditation looks like. There'd be cushions and candles and ashrams and or Buddhism or Zen or something, Eastern stuff, almost certainly. You wouldn't get Catholic contemplation being readily thought of, for instance, and you certainly wouldn't get me when I'm meditating. I'll tell you what it looks like. Me in front of my computer with my task folder saying, God, which of these things do you want me to do today? And then putting them in a folder which says, today, I drag. That's what meditation looks like. Another way of doing it, that the whole emptying the mind. I have done that sort of mindfulness stuff, and I found it's not really my thing, but it's perfectly good. Nothing wrong with any of those things. But the meditation designed for alcoholics takes into account what alcoholics are, which is why specifically in the big book, it doesn't say try to clear your mind of thoughts. It says, God, please direct my thinking into a new direction. Into what? The actual day ahead. That is it. I have a spiritual mentor, is my Al-Anon go-to person who's been sober since 1976 and Al-Anon since soon after. And he's also a Jesuit priest. And I've spent some time with him. And his step 11, he would go and sit on the porch of the place we were staying in with his books and just read his books for an hour. And if he wanted to stop reading and pray for a moment, he'd pray. And then he'd carry on reading. And then he'd pray. And he might read some prayers. And then he'd read a little more. Very straightforward. So his meditation was simply occupying his mind with higher things. So I don't worry about, I tried transcendental meditation, and I like a Christianized version of transcendental meditation my first 5 years. I almost committed suicide. I found I couldn't do it because the noise in my head was so bad. And then I read this book. It said, if you do this for 20 years, you might get some enlightenment. I'm on a schedule here. I haven't got 20 years. I will be dead by Thursday. Give me something now. And what I got now was saying to God, help me. Help me. And then give me something useful to do. And then the voice would say, call a newcomer. So I'd call a newcomer and feel better. That's God intervening. That's providence. It's not being struck in a spiritual state. It's doing the simple things that AA asks me to do and discovering myself lifted out of my condition by doing something like making a cup of tea, asking someone how their day was, doing the laundry, going to bed, rather than staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning, pacing the room, drinking coffee, wondering what's wrong with my life. Very basic things. So just find some housewives in AA and do what they suggest. Housewives over 70 and do what they suggest. They're usually the ones that are right on the money. There we go.
Fantastic advice, Tim. That was awesome. Thank you to everyone who participated in the Q&A. Thank you, Tim, for your wonderful answers. And with that, I will pass it back over to Donna.